what you can't explain. It's coming back again. I can see it now, I can see it now. What you can't explain, coming back again.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. Jessica Padgett was the kind of woman that people described as light, trusting, and focused entirely on her family, who she loved more than anything in the world. A devoted mother, a newlywed, and a student building a better future for her 3 children, Jessica trusted easily and loved deeply. She also believed that family meant safety. So when Jessica walked into her stepfather's home one day during her lunch break, just trying to send a fax, she had no idea that she was walking into a trap set by the man who had helped raise her. What happened next defies understanding. It truly does. It boggles the mind. It's a story of shocking depravity and a betrayal so monstrous it left even seasoned detectives shaken. This is the story of Jessica Padgett, and it's one you'll never forget, I promise, because I will never forget it. Now, this case was actually requested by one of you, Shells B8042, and I have mixed feelings. What happened to Jessica does honestly need more awareness, and it is timely because as we speak, a Pennsylvania state representative, Zachary Macco, has announced plans for legislation that would expand the charges that qualify a defendant for the death penalty. And this law is going to be named Jessica's Law, after Jessica Padgett. It is very important to talk about right now, but after diving deep into this case, I truly will never be the same. I just can't imagine how you could, read about something like this and go through a case like this and remain unchanged. The details of this case have shifted and changed something deep inside of me, and I don't see myself ever being able to forget what happened to Jessica and how absolutely horrific and unnecessary it all was. And I will think about Jessica, I think, every single day. We have a lot to talk about. I know that this is going to be a long video because I've already filmed it and there was an issue with the sound, so I'm filming it again. So I know for a fact it's a longer video. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of different layers to this. But first, we need to have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Saley, because our sponsors keep us going. So let's have a word from Saley and we'll come back and dive right in. Today's video is sponsored by Saley, and if you travel a lot like I do, or even if you just like to stay ready, this one's for you. One of the biggest pains and biggest stressors when traveling, especially internationally, is losing connection the moment you land. And I travel a lot, not usually internationally, but because I live in upstate New York and I'm closer to Canada than I am to New York City, I do go to Canada a lot. I like to go to, obviously, Niagara Falls because it's awesome. It's beautiful. I like to go to Toronto for the restaurants, for the shows. And when I'm traveling for pleasure, I also like to continue working. So sometimes I'm chasing down obscure case files overseas. So a lot of the time I'm working on the plane. A lot of the time I'm working at the airport or at the hotel, wherever I'm staying. If I'm in Canada and I'm trying to track down like obscure case files or get access to certain court documents, or even if I'm just trying to book an Uber at the airport, staying connected really matters. Also for me, as a woman traveling alone often, safety matters. Not having a connection when you're in a different country is very scary. So that's where Saley comes in. Saley is an eSIM app that gives you fast, affordable data without the hassle. That means no more hunting for SIM cards in sketchy airport kiosks or weird back alleys. If you know, you know. No more insane roaming fees. With one download, you can stay online wherever you are. And I did try Saley on my last trip to Canada. It was so easy. I just downloaded the app, picked a plan, used my own code, stephanieharlowe, to get 15% off, and I was connected before my plane even reached the gate. It worked right away. I was able to access maps, message family, even check case notes, and respond to emails, and have access to my Google Docs, which is where I keep all my notes and my scripts while I was in line for customs. And the best part is you only have to install it once. If you're hitting multiple countries, Saley has global and regional plans that travel with you, and when you're down to 20% data, they notify you, so you're never going to be caught off guard. So all you have to do is scan the QR code that you'll see on the screen, or go to saley.com/stephanieharlowe, download the app, and use code stephanieharlowe at checkout for an exclusive 15% discount. That is Saley, SAILY.com/stephanieharlowe for 15% discount. You're going to save time, avoid scams, and never have to wander around looking for Wi-Fi again. And trust me, when you're knee-deep in a true crime rabbit hole across the globe, the connection can make all the difference. Thank you so much to Saley for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. If you asked anyone who knew her, Jessica Padgett was the kind of person who made others feel safe and loved just being around her. At the age of 33, she had recently married the love of her life, Michael, after 8 years together. She was a proud mother to 2 young sons and a loving stepmother to 1 daughter. And it was very clear to anyone who knew her that her children were the center of her world. I know we talk very positively about victims on this channel. I know we say these things like, oh, they lit up a room when they walked in and they were the nicest person ever. And that's all usually true. And in this case with Jessica, it's also true. But the connection that she had with her children, the amount that she loved her children, how devoted she was to giving them everything she had, that is something that remains standard across the board. No matter who you talk to, they always brought that up when talking about Jessica. There are tons and tons of accounts of how much time and energy Jessica devoted to her children, making them happy, making them feel loved, and caring for them in every aspect. And Jessica was juggling motherhood with her studies at Lehigh Carbon Community College, where she was working towards a degree in early childhood education. She also worked at a local daycare center called Duck Duck Goose, where her gentle nature and bright smile made her a favorite among both her coworkers and the children she looked after. And Jessica had deep roots in Northampton, one of those small Pennsylvania towns where everybody seems to know everybody. It's the kind of place where families settle down and stay. Neighbors wave from their porches, and life moves at a slower, quieter pace. Jessica was a 1998 graduate of Whitehall High School, and she was the kind of hometown girl who stayed close to the people she loved. In fact, I read a news article where her cousin was interviewed, and her cousin said that when she and Jessica were little, they would always be together because their parents lived on the same street. And then when they got older, Jessica purchased her parents' house, and then Jessica's cousin purchased her parents' house, and so they continued living on the same street and being close to each other, obviously both physically and emotionally. And Jessica's parents, Danelle and Thomas, had divorced when she was young, but she still maintained a strong relationship with both of them, as well as her eventual stepfather, Gregory Graff. Now, Jessica's mother, Danelle, and Gregory Graff had gotten married when Jessica was 16 years old, but he'd been in her life since she was 11. And as time went on, Jessica would often post online about her tight-knit family, expressing love and gratitude to the people who had helped raise her, including her stepfather. To the outside world, Jessica's life looked very full and happy. A good marriage, motherhood, education, a strong support system. And honestly, what I've come to discover is that Jessica's life was very full. This is one of those rare instances where the social media posts matched the reality. Jessica was very happy with her current life, just as it was. And she was happy with the dreams and the plans she had for her future, which would no doubt only benefit her family even more and increase the life satisfaction of everyone she loved. There was just one person in her life that Jessica had trusted, who she should not have, but no one would have guessed what kinds of secrets and darkness this person was harboring. Genuinely, I don't think that anyone could have seen this coming. Now, I want to build some more backstory and give you some more context because I kept coming back to this time and time again as I went through the news articles and Jessica's own Facebook profile. We all know that sometimes divorce and family tension early on in life can negatively impact someone. And then if the parents who got divorced introduce new partners to the family dynamic, and there's already kind of bad blood and sort of negativity, that can sometimes only increase tensions, hurt, and anger. But this genuinely did not seem to be the case with Jessica Padgett and her family. Her parents got divorced, and when she was still quite young, her mother married Gregory Graff, who had at least, I believe, 2 children from a previous relationship, a daughter and a son. And not only did Jessica have a very close relationship with her biological siblings, but she did consider Greg's children to be her siblings as well. There's photos on Facebook of Jessica's children, freshly born babies, and throughout the years being held by Greg and his children, and they all seem like one big happy family. Greg's daughter posts constantly on Jessica's Facebook. If Jessica would post a picture of herself or her family, or she just post a Facebook update, the daughter of Greg would constantly be commenting. You could tell that Jessica and Greg's daughter were very, very close. Jessica even posted something on Facebook about her 2 dads, the one who she was born to and the one who had helped raise her, thanking them both for their positive contribution to her life. And it's likely that Jessica was also very happy for her mother and her stepfather, Greg, because their lives seemed to be very happy and financially comfortable. Greg and Danielle lived at 451 Covered Bridge Road, a 2,652 square foot colonial home situated on 7 acres on the outskirts of town. The house boasted 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a walkout basement, in-ground swimming pool, and detached 2-car garage. And the spacious 7 acres that Greg and Danielle owned also allowed for their business, Distinctive Fencing, to operate on the same property. And if the name didn't give it away, Distinctive Fencing is a fencing company, and the company had been family-owned and operated since 1979. Greg himself had worked there as a younger man, and as an adult, he and his wife ran the company with a handful of employees, and business had been booming, obviously. Business had been so good that Greg and Danielle were able to eventually afford a second home in Edgewater, Florida. So what it looks like happened is they would go to Florida, Edgewater often, and maybe they owned like a condo there, or maybe they rented a home there or something, and then eventually they had enough money where they were like, okay, we're going to build our dream house in Edgewater, Florida. And Gregory Graff, as it turns out, was an avid outdoorsman, but he especially loved hunting and fishing, which he did religiously in both Pennsylvania and Florida. And I say religiously, not to use it as some random, descriptive word, but because it seemed that hunting was Greg's only identity. It seemed to be all that he did and all he cared about. He was very passionate about it. And if you looked on his Facebook, that's what you would see, right? You'd see Greg talking about hunting. You'd see pictures of the animals he killed. You would see him being like, oh, it's time to go out hunting again. Or, oh, it's raining today. It's ruining my hunting. Stuff like that. That's pretty much it. Oh, also, he liked to brag to his Facebook friends about the beautiful home that he was building in Florida. He loved to do that as the house was being built and as it kind of went through the stages of being built. Greg would make sure to update everybody so they could have FOMO. Greg has got pictures of a variety of different dead animals on his Facebook page that he considered trophies. You got turkeys, deer, even alligators, along with snapshots of the many weapons he owned, which were responsible for ending these animals' lives. Now, there were a few posts that caught my eye as especially disturbing. So Gregory Graff posted a picture of what looks like a cake. It definitely is a cake. But if I walked into a party or a Sunday family dinner and saw this cake on the table, I have no appetite. I'm not eating this cake, and I'm not eating again for the rest of the day, because this specific cake was shaped like a dead deer with the crosses over their eyes and everything, and a bloody arrow piercing its midsection. There's blood, fake blood on the cake, and then an arrow just and a dead deer, and oof, real weird. My initial reaction to that was to recoil in horror. But Greg loved this, right? He loved this cake, and he shared this photo and simply said, I want one. There was another photo of a gator with a massive bullet hole in its head. I'm not going to post it here because it's that graphic. I might see if my editor can maybe blur out some parts of it, just so I'm not, exaggerating or making things up. But it wasn't so much the picture, which was horrendous enough to see, honestly, but it was the way that Greg captioned the picture. He said, "Someone has a headache, LOL." Like, he's amused. He's amused by this. Now, look, I do understand that a lot of people enjoy hunting. For many, it's something they grew up with. It's cultural, it's about providing food, or it's just a part of life in rural areas. I live in a rural area. People like to hunt here. I get it. That's fine. Do you. I'm not here to judge responsible hunters. But I'll be honest. Personally, I find it unsettling when someone seems to glorify the act of killing, when their social media is filled with pictures of dead animals, when their social media is filled with pictures of them smiling next to their prey, like it's this thing to be proud of, cracking jokes about it. Someone has a headache. Ugh, it makes me, I want to say uncomfortable, but it makes me angry, and also just sickened. I think it's sickening. These are living creatures. And when someone seems so proud of taking a life over and over again, it can start to feel less like a hobby and more like a warning sign. And I know what your response is going to be. There's people who watch me and who are watching this video who probably do enjoy hunting as a hobby or a sport. And your response to me is going to be like, oh, well, what about you? You don't eat meat? Do you know what they do to these animals and these plants and how cruel they are to them? And yes, I do understand that. And when somebody starts posting pictures on their Facebook of animals being slaughtered at a plant and standing next to these animals and smiling like a clown and making jokes about it, like, somebody's going to be sore in the morning, then I will also have something to say about that. Okay. It's just how I feel. And I'm going to talk about this in a bit more depth later on. Trust me, this is going to come back. But right now, we have to talk about the day Jessica Padgett went missing. It was November 21st, 2014, the Friday before Thanksgiving, and Jessica left the house that morning to head into work. First, she dropped her older two kids off at school, and then she, along with her 2-year-old son, traveled to Duck Duck Goose, where Jessica worked and where her son stayed during the day. So her son goes to daycare there, Jessica works there. This was a perfect setup for her because she's taking early childhood education classes. She hates to be away from her kids. Dropping her kids off at daycare is very hard. We're going to come back around to that. And so it's very cool to her, and it makes her feel great that she can be in the same daycare facility as her 2-year-old, and she can go pop into, the toddler room and visit him and see him and give him a hug and a kiss whenever she wants. So Jessica and her son arrived as normal at 8:30 a.m., but later that afternoon, Jessica let her coworkers know that she had to quickly leave on her lunch break to send a fax to her healthcare provider. Now, she had a very short time for her lunch break. She only had 30 minutes, but she was only running over to her mother and stepfather's house, which was just 4 miles away. Remember, Jessica's mother and stepfather, the Graffs, they also ran a business on their property, and Jessica worked part-time at this business, so she knew that they had a fax machine that she could use, and apparently the daycare's fax wasn't working. The entire trip there and back should have taken just over 20 minutes. And Jessica left the daycare center at 12:50 p.m. She left her son still in daycare, and she told everyone she would be right back. But Jessica never came back. And when no one had heard anything from her by 2 p.m., her coworkers became concerned, and they called her husband Michael. Michael, who goes by Micah, he had been dating Jessica for 8 years. They had 2 children together, and they had just officially tied the knot only 2 months before on September 6th, 2014. Michael worked in construction, and he had left early that morning getting a ride into work. When Micah heard that Jessica had never gone back to work, he was concerned. Jessica is not somebody to be out of contact, and once again, we say this about a lot of the victims we speak about in these cases, but everybody stressed this. Jessica was very social, seemed like her social battery never ran out, very outgoing. She liked to talk and chat, and she was always in contact with people. And Jessica had talked with both Micah and her sister, Christy, within minutes of leaving work. She'd sent a Facebook message to Christy, who at that time was 9 months pregnant, telling her that she wanted to see her niece being born. And then her last communication was a phone call to her husband at 1 p.m., but no one had heard anything from her since. Micah called Jessica's cell phone several times, but when he got no answer, he called Jessica's mother, Danelle, to see if she had talked to Jessica. And at that time, Danelle was in Florida, picking out carpets for the house that she and her husband were building. And she told Micah to call Jessica's stepfather, Gregory Graff. When Micah called Gregory Graff told him that Jessica had not stopped by that day, that he hadn't seen her, she wasn't there, he didn't know anything, okay? So when Danelle also could not get a hold of her daughter, she boarded the first plane headed back to Pennsylvania. Now, even though Jessica had not been MIA for long, just a few hours, everyone who knew her was worried. Like I said, it was so unlike her to not be in contact, to not answer her phone, especially for her husband. So while Danelle flew back home, Micah called the police and reported his wife missing. And this led to them putting out something called an ATL, an attempt to locate. And I will give a shout out to law enforcement in this case. So often when adults go missing, the police don't take it seriously, you know? They're like, oh, she's an adult. She's in her 30s. Maybe she had a fight with her husband. Maybe she just needed to blow off some steam. You know, she's juggling a lot, work, school, kids. Maybe she just wanted some time by herself. She's an adult. She can go missing if she wants. But in this case, they really did spring into action. And because of that, I think that a lot of the events that unfolded after unfolded far more quickly than they would have. And we also have evidence that was able to be preserved that may not have been there had they waited their 24, 48, 72 hours that some police officers say you have to wait before you can report an adult missing. The police also pinged Jessica's cell phone coordinates, which led law enforcement to a Dollar General on Main Street, which was about a mile away from the Duck Duck Goose Daycare Center. Now, in the parking lot of that business, Jessica's white Subaru Outback was found abandoned in a space that was situated pretty far from the store. The car was unlocked, and inside, police officers recovered Jessica's car keys, cell phone, and wallet with all her bank cards and identification inside. And this is going to help police decide that maybe this isn't just a woman who wanted to disappear and go to the spa or have a few hours to herself, right? She left her cell phone in the car. She left her car there. So how is she getting anywhere? She left her credit cards there. So what is she doing for money? Obviously, this is concerning. And this discovery prompted family and friends of Jessica to become even more worried because they knew that Jessica was consistent and dependable, and she'd never willingly leave her husband and children. Recently, before her disappearance, Jessica had struggled to leave her kids to go on her honeymoon, and a friend reported that Jessica had to come back for kisses from her children repeatedly before finally being able to drive away from them. So there was, a good amount of separation anxiety that Jessica felt being away from her kids, whereas a lot of parents would be like, I'm exhausted. I need a break. Mommy will be back in a week. See you later. And they would be fine with that after 1 or 2 kisses. But Jessica really had trouble being away from her children, and everybody knew that. So search parties began to form with the intention of finding Jessica or evidence related to where she might be. And one of the searchers was a man named Jim Wilkins. Wilkins' wife had grown up with Jessica, and they'd lived across the street from her for the past 5 years. And he said that the fact Jessica's vehicle had been found in a back parking space made him suspicious because she was, quote, notorious for finding close parking spaces, end quote. And because Northampton had such a small police department, they called in help from the Pennsylvania State Police very quickly. And District Attorney John Morganelli, who's awesome, by the way, we're going to hear from him several times during this video, he said, quote, "I believe the state police are moving in the right direction. We're treating this as a criminal investigation. We're still optimistic that Miss Padgett will resurface, hopefully without any harm or injury," end quote. So the police were understanding of the fact that, it looks like foul play happened here. This woman didn't just go missing without her car, her credit cards, her cell phone. We need to look into this and start treating this investigation as a criminal matter. And they did have hope that Jessica would return unharmed, right? But that hope would fade as investigators interviewed people and began tracking down surveillance footage. Now, the thing with the Dollar General was they did have surveillance cameras, but Jessica's car had been parked so far back in the parking lot that the surveillance cameras at the Dollar General weren't seeing her car, basically. It was too far away. It wasn't pointed that direction, et cetera, et cetera. Luckily, there was a place across the street, Tanzo Beer Distributor, and they had surveillance cameras that pointed directly at Jessica's car. And when police reviewed it, they saw her vehicle enter the parking lot at 1:13 p.m. before parking. After this, a figure is seen. Initially, they presumed it was Jessica. The figure got out of the vehicle and stood alone outside of the vehicle for a period of time before walking away and exiting the parking lot using a little alley between a pet store and the town's magistrate office. The figure disappeared once they entered the alley, and the figure was not seen on surveillance returning to the vehicle after that. Now, law enforcement then considered the route that Jessica would have taken from Duck Duck Goose to her parents' home, and they discovered that there were many businesses with surveillance cameras along that path. Police were able to recover video footage from the Exxon gas station located at 2428 Main Street, which was just a 1.5-mile drive away from the daycare. At 12:56 p.m., Jessica's white Subaru was seen on this footage driving past the station in the direction of the Graff home. This vehicle was driving at a normal pace, obeying traffic signs and rules, and the timing made perfect sense because if Jessica left work at 12:50 and it was only about a 5-minute drive from the daycare to the Exxon station, her vehicle would be expected to pass that point at right around the time that it did. And it was only a 10-minute drive from the daycare to the Graff home. So basically, law enforcement knew that when she passed the Exxon station, Jessica was halfway to the Graff home, and she should have been returning to work and passing the Exxon station again not long after. And as they expected, Jessica's Subaru was seen on surveillance again at 1:10 p.m., driving from the direction of the Graff home and back towards Duck Duck Goose. But this time, the Subaru was driving a bit differently. It was going faster, and it cut through the gas station parking lot at high speed to avoid a red light. So basically, there was a red light on Main Street. The car didn't want to stop at that red light, so it cut through the gas station parking lot to avoid having to stop at the red light. And initially, law enforcement believed this happened because Jessica was in a hurry to get back to work in time, but they would soon find out that this was not the case. While detectives looked for clues in the surveillance videos and searched for Jessica, they were also questioning people, including Jessica's mother, Danielle, and her stepfather, Gregory Graff. Greg claimed that Jessica had previously asked him if it was okay to use the fax machine, but at the time that she would have arrived at his house, he'd been out running errands for his business. He mentioned that Jessica had her own key, so no one would have needed to be there to let her in, but he also said that his fax machine wasn't working and hadn't been working in some time, which to me is an immediate red flag because why would Gregory Graff have told Jessica she could come over and fax something if he knew the fax machine was out of order? Greg also had some words about Jessica and her taste in men. He claimed that his stepdaughter attracted losers and that he didn't like her current husband, Micah. And so then detectives went to Micah to question him about his whereabouts on the day that he went missing. And Micah told them that it had been a day just like any other. He'd gotten up early for work that morning, put on a pot of coffee, and he was then picked up and driven to work by a friend, leaving his own truck at the home that he shared with his wife and children. And Micah told the police that he didn't have access to his truck until after 2 p.m. that day, and his coworkers and managers verified his alibi. Micah was at work, and someone had eyes on him during the critical period where Jessica vanished. So coming up with no leads, police returned to the surveillance of Jessica's vehicle in the Dollar General parking lot, and they viewed the video again. And here's what I think happened. I think initially when they viewed the video, they had viewed it at the beer distributor, on their surveillance cameras. So it's not going to be the best quality, and it's going to be grainy, and the beer distributor was already across the street from the Dollar General where Jessica's car was parked, so it's already kind of far away, and you're going to have a hard time making out details. But when law enforcement viewed the video again, they watched it on a high-definition screen, and this time it was made pretty clear that it was not Jessica exiting her vehicle. It was the figure of a much larger person, a man standing at least 6 feet tall. So as law enforcement watched the clearer video, they could see that after this man got out of the Subaru, he got down next to the driver's seat for a few seconds, and he adjusted the seat and moved it forward. Why did he do that? Well, so that it would appear that someone shorter than he was had last driven it. Once detectives realized that the figure on the surveillance could not be Jessica Padgett, they began investigating the possibility that whoever it was had fled, either on foot or in a vehicle. So law enforcement pulls some more surveillance from the roads. They're looking at local businesses, and sure enough, 50 seconds after the male figure disappeared into the alley, a white truck could be seen on surveillance driving west towards the Graff home. And luckily, this truck was somewhat distinctive looking. It was a white Ford F-150 with a camper attached and a black stripe on the bottom. And one police officer remembered seeing a vehicle just like it. And where did he see that vehicle? Well, he saw it when he was at the home of Gregory Graff, questioning him about the disappearance of his stepdaughter. So Gregory Graff was brought in for questioning again, and he was asked to explain the presence of his vehicle in the exact place where Jessica's Subaru had been abandoned and at the exact same time. And Graff claimed, "Listen, there's nothing to see here. I didn't do anything wrong. I took my truck into town that day. But there's nothing suspicious about it because I was planning to have it repaired at a service station behind the alley." He claimed that he had asked his neighbor and friend, Karen Gundrum, to help him drop off his vehicle and then get him back home. But at the last minute, he changed his mind and he decided against getting his truck repaired. I don't know why he decided against that, because that is suspicious to me. If you're going to have your neighbor come and pick you up so you can get your truck repaired, it seems like everything's sort of in line. If your truck needs to be repaired, you should probably get it repaired. No better time than the present. But he says he did not want to get his truck repaired that day, so he left. Now, Karen and her husband, David Gundrum, were the Graffs' closest neighbors. Covered Bridge Road is a private road with very few homes and even less traffic, and the Gundrums' home was half a mile down the road from the Graffs. Obviously, detectives were going to verify Graff's story by talking to Karen Gundrum. And not only did Karen tell them that she had not driven Greg into town that day, that he had not asked her to pick him up, she said she didn't even see him that day, November 21st. Obviously, detectives were going to try and verify Greg's story by talking to Karen Gundrum. And she told them that not only had she not driven Greg into town that day, not only had he not asked her to pick him up from the car mechanics, she hadn't even seen him that day, November 21st. And after Jessica went missing, Karen claims that Greg had asked her to lie about this story to Jessica's brother, Jeremy. So during Greg's second interview with the police, he had also given some other information that the police had to check up on. He had claimed that after driving his car away from the repair shop, he'd stopped at the Exxon gas station to grab some lunch around 1:30 p.m. So to grab some lunch, you would think he'd park, go in, be in the store for a few minutes, get some lunch, come out, and get back in his truck. And then Greg said after that, he'd gone right home because his employees were going to start showing up at his house to pick up their paychecks. So then law enforcement once again reviewed surveillance footage from the Exxon station, and they confirmed that Greg's truck had driven by, but it had not stopped at the gas station at all. However, Greg's employees did verify that he had been home at 3:30 p.m. handing out paychecks. And at that time, Graf seemed completely fine. He was in a good mood, conversational, even cracking jokes. And when I tell you later why this is messed up, you'll understand. This is totally messed up that this guy could even pretend to be normal after what had happened just right before he's handing paychecks out to his employees. So on November 24th, Gregory Graff was brought in for another interview with detectives to explain the holes in his story. At this time, Graff admitted that his neighbor Karen had not driven him into town. He claimed that when he got home on November 21st, he'd seen his stepdaughter Jessica's vehicle parked in his driveway, but he couldn't find her anywhere, right? She wasn't inside, she wasn't outside, she was nowhere to be found. So Greg says he got scared and he made the decision to move the Subaru to the Dollar General parking lot. The police report stated, quote, he related that because Jessica Padgett had told him previously that she was in financial trouble and people were after her, he grew fearful and panicked. He related that he drove her car from his home and parked it in the parking lot where it was discovered, end quote. Obviously, we understand that none of this makes any sense and that Gregory Graff is probably the most suspicious person to ever exist. So detectives concluded that not only had Graff been the one on surveillance seen driving Jessica's vehicle, but he'd been at home at the time when Jessica would have arrived there. On the 24th, Jessica's mother, Danelle, gave police permission to search the home that she shared with Graff. And this was mainly and obviously because she wanted to do anything she could to help locate her daughter. But Danelle was also a little bit suspicious of her husband's story. She said that she had arrived back to Northampton from Florida on November 22nd, and when her husband Greg had picked her up from the airport, he had told her everything was going to be okay, Jessica was going to be found. But when police entered her home to search it, Danelle pointed something out to them that had been weighing on her. She said that there were a pair of tan sandals that her husband always wore, but she had noticed, since returning from Florida, the straps on those sandals were missing, and police would eventually locate the straps to the sandals in a basement garbage can next to the washer and dryer. They were stained with something that a chemical test indicated to be human blood. The garbage also contained a product designed for cleaning the inside of washing machines, as well as a paper towel that also tested positive for the presence of human blood. Stains that were reddish-brown were also noted on the basement floor next to a pool table, and that was not all that the police found while in the Graff home. Not only was Graff's fax machine not broken, but law enforcement printed out a fax history, which showed that at 1:04 p.m., a fax had been successfully sent out to a local healthcare facility, and the signature of Jessica Padgett was on that form. Detectives also found that on November 24th, someone had used the home computer to search for local landfills, and only Danelle and Greg had access to the computer on that day. And that same day, early in the morning, Greg had called his trash company, Marth's Disposal Service, and he had asked them to come and get the trash from his home. Now, Roger Marth, the owner of the company, would later testify that he was surprised to get such an early morning call from Gregory Graff because typically it was Danelle who would call, and she would always call later in the afternoon. An employee of the company, Sean Holland, also testified that when he arrived to get the bins, he had to call his boss, Marth, and double check that Graff had actually requested the bins to be taken away because the bin was only half full. And Holland said, quote, usually when I go there, stuff is sticking out the top, end quote. Well, as it turns out, in the garbage bin that day, there were the bloody clothes of Jessica Padgett, which of course Gregory Graff would have wanted to have seen disposed of as quickly as possible. Now, Deneen would also later tell detectives that on November 25th, her husband changed his story with her. And he's already changed it with law enforcement, so of course he's going to change it with his wife. And now Greg was claiming that when he got home on November 21st, he'd seen Jessica's vehicle, and then he found blood stains inside the house. Gregory Graff told Danelle that he panicked and moved Jessica's car because he was worried the police would suspect him, and that if he told the truth, no one would believe him. He also mentioned that he suspected Jessica had owed someone money, and that these people were mad and had hurt Jessica. And isn't that always the way it goes, right? Like, first of all, this was not his first story. This was not his second story. We're going on 3, 4 stories, but they always blame it on some like grander conspiracy, like, oh, it was drugs or organized crime, because it's very hard to prove. And people are very conspiracy minded and they tend to believe that there's a possibility something like that could have happened. And so for Gregory Graff to kind of use that and just pull it out of his ass after 2 to 3 stories that he already came up with, I don't believe it. And the police didn't believe it either, because on November 25th, law enforcement returned to Graff's home to question him about the bloody paper towel they found in the basement garbage can. And according to State Trooper Barton, when he's there and he's like, hey, what's up with this blood in the garbage can? What's going on here? Gregory Graff did not answer the question. Instead, he paused and then he requested a cigarette. And the Trooper Barton, accompanied Graff upstairs to get one. And while they were up there, Trooper Barton mentioned something about Greg's 2 German pointers, Nash and Jade. I forgot to tell you. Greg, he loves hunting. He loves his house in Florida. He doesn't talk about anything else except his 2 German pointers, Nash and Jade, who go with him on every hunting trip. He's got pictures of them. Does he have pictures of his grandkids? Not that I could see. Does he have pictures of his kids? Not that I could see. But dead animals and Nash and Jade, they are taking precedence on this Facebook page. So Trooper Barton is trying to be conversational. And he said, hey, my brother has a similar dog. And these are really good dogs that you have. And reportedly, according to Trooper Barton, Gregory Graff's response to this was, quote, it's a shame I'm not going to get to see them anymore, end quote. Which once again shows you where this dude's priorities are at. I mean, like, I would also be sad if I was, gonna go somewhere long term, like prison, and not be able to see my dogs. I would be very sad, but I'd also be like, I'm not gonna see my kids, I'm not gonna see my grandkids, my wife, but the dogs, Nash and Jade, very important. And I don't understand how somebody who loves dogs so much could, take part in like killing a bunch of animals, which leads me to believe he didn't actually love those dogs. He loved that they were beautiful dogs and that people complimented him about them. And he loved that they helped him with hunting. So they were like on his side. But I don't really think that Gregory Graff really gave a shit about anybody but himself. And I don't have a ton of evidence to back that up, but I just don't like this dude. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little biased. So at that point, Trooper Barton was like, oh, I knew this dude was ready to confess, because he's like puffing on his cigarette, all thoughtful. He's not really answering questions. And then he makes a comment like that. Barton was like, let's get him to the police station. So they brought Gregory Graff to the police station, where he gave a full, detailed confession. And it was horrific. Just as a heads up, if you're eating anything right now, don't do that. Stop eating. For a little bit, a couple minutes. Just, you're not going to want to be consuming food at this time, because I'm about to describe to you the unthinkable. Now, Gregory Graff confirmed that his stepdaughter Jessica had in fact arrived on the afternoon of November 21st. And he had known she was coming because she'd asked to use the fax machine on her lunch break in advance. And Jessica comes into the house, she goes into the office, she sits down at, the computer fax area. And while Jessica sat in a computer chair with her back to him, Gregory Graff went to a nearby closet and retrieved a .22 caliber semi-automatic, a weapon he often used out when he was hunting. And then Gregory Graff shot Jessica in the back of the head, killing her instantly. Graff then dragged Jessica's body from the office to a spare bedroom located on the first floor at the back of his home. And Graff told police that at this point he knew he didn't have a lot of time. So he drove Jessica's Subaru to the Dollar General parking lot. And he told the police, I drove like a madman. I cut through the parking lot of the Exxon station. So what we have here is when you see Jessica driving by in her Subaru on the way to Greg Graff's house, it is Jessica driving. But when you see the Subaru come back on the way towards the Dollar General, it's Graff driving. So once parked in that back parking space, and I think that he did that intentionally to evade the Dollar General surveillance cameras, because the Dollar General did have surveillance cameras, but Jessica's car was parked too far away to be seen on those surveillance cameras. So I definitely think that Graff intentionally picked the back of the parking lot for that reason. Then he got out and he moved the driver's seat back into its previous position. And he told the cops he did this so that it would appear that Jessica was the last one driving the car. After returning home, Greg handed out paychecks to his employees, acting normally and shooting the shit. And really have a concept of this. You just shot your daughter-in-law. And really have an idea of what's happening here. You just shot your stepdaughter in the back of the head. I'm going to assume that there was some sort of mess to clean up. You probably had to put your clothes in the washing machine, which is why we see the chemical in the garbage can next to the washer and dryer. That's for cleaning the inside of washing machines. He probably had to wash his clothes, his bloody clothes, in the washing machine. And then he used that chemical to clean the washer out. So you did that. And then you have to quickly move her car and hide it, right? So that nobody knows that she was at your house, even though she told the people she worked with she was going to your house. And then you gotta drive back in your truck, which, by the way, he made sure was waiting for him in the area of the Dollar General, so that once he drove Jessica's car to the Dollar General, he'd get in his car and drive home. So then you got to drive your car back at breakneck speed, and then you sit there and act like nothing happened, cracking jokes with your employees and giving them their paychecks like, hey, Janice, how's your son? Did he score a goal at soccer last weekend? Hey, Mark, how's that hernia? Is it acting up? Just the amount of psychopathy that you have to have in order to not only do what Gregory Graff did, but then to act normally and talk to people and give them their paychecks and laugh while the body of your stepdaughter is laying in a back bedroom. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And then when everybody had their paychecks and he was alone, Gregory Graff admitted that he went into that back bedroom where Jessica's body was. And then he told police that he put a bag over Jessica's head. He said he did this because he didn't want to see her and because all the blood was freaking him out. Gregory Graff then placed Jessica's lifeless body on a bed. He set up 2 video cameras, and then he filmed himself performing sexual acts on the corpse of his stepdaughter. Obviously, the detectives in the room during this confession were shocked. They had not anticipated this being the motive for Jessica's disappearance and eventual murder. And when I say this was the motive, I mean that Gregory Graff admitted that he had killed his stepdaughter so that he could have sex with her dead body. And specifics of what this video contained, we don't need to really get into that. Thankfully, you will thank me. We don't need to get into that, but it was revealed that Graff committed a variety of sexual acts against Jessica Padgett, and he had used sex toys on her. Sex toys that he had purchased the day before. And after he was done with all of this, Gregory Graff wrapped Jessica's naked body in a blanket and then buried it on his property. And when I say buried, once again, he didn't really bury it. He kind of left her by a shed and then covered her body with some debris and leaves. And then he would eventually have to draw a diagram showing law enforcement exactly where he had left Jessica's body, because 7 acres of land, it's quite a bit. And on November 26th, the police recovered Jessica's body buried under these leaves and other debris next to a shed. She'd been left face down.
At this time, I can tell you that unfortunately, we have sad news to announce today that Jessica Padgett is deceased. She's the victim of a homicide and in custody today. And I authorized the filing of a charge of criminal homicide against her stepfather, Gregory Graff. The investigation has determined that Mr. Graff is responsible for killing this lady in the home and disposing of her body on the property. The body of Jessica was discovered today by the Pennsylvania State Police, and the family members of Ms. Padgett have been notified. The investigation in this case by the State Police, I will say early on, focused on Mr. Graff because of inconsistent statements that he was giving with respect to his activities that day, and did not correspond with the investigation information that was being developed by State Police.
Had they had problems in the past? Had she had problems with him?
There was no indication that she had any type of relationship with him that was other than, congenial or good. She had worked for him at some point and had access to his house.
How long had he been her stepfather? When did he marry her mother?
I believe about the age that she was 12.
Okay, so for a long time, he's been in her life.
And don't quote me on that direct age, but it's been some time. Yes.
Okay.
So Gregory Graff is obviously arrested. He's charged with first-degree murder, which means premeditation. We're going to get into that. And he was charged with desecration of a corpse. And during a brief court appearance, Gregory Graff requested a taxpayer-funded lawyer so that he could avoid spending money that he claimed his family could otherwise have access to and use. And this is absolutely ridiculous because we know Gregory Graff's got money, right? And it's going to be even more ridiculous towards the end of the video when I tell you what else Gregory Graff has done since, being charged and put on trial. It's just going to be ridiculous. You're going to understand that he wasn't worried about taking money from his family. I believe that Gregory Graff was delusional enough at that point to feel that he could convince anybody, that this had not been premeditated. Maybe he thought he could get off of it altogether. And he didn't want his money to be wasted on defending himself against a crime that he not only confessed to committing, but recorded himself performing unspeakable acts in the aftermath. He genuinely thought he's going to get out and he'll be able to use this money. That's what I think. And Gregory Graff told the court that his assets were held jointly with his wife, Danelle, and he didn't want to deplete them. You didn't mind killing her daughter, though. You're like, I don't want to take money from my wife. That's horrible. What kind of man would I be? What kind of husband would I be if I depleted my wife's funds? You killed her daughter, okay? I think that you've taken enough from her. And I find it funny that this asshole literally was like, I don't want to use my own money to have to pay for a defense attorney to defend me against a crime that I committed. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And the district attorney, who, remember, I said is awesome, John Morganelli, he also feels the same way, and he dismissed this request. He said that by Graff's own financial statements, everyone knew he had the financial means to pay for his own lawyer, and Morganelli said, quote, Mr. Graff had just basically told you that he'd rather waste the taxpayer money on his defense than his own money, end quote. And that's exactly what Graff said. And Graff's probably sitting there like, yeah, that's what I said. Doesn't that make sense? Who wouldn't want to spend somebody else's money over their own money? What are we talking about here, dude? So Morganelli would also disclose that Graff had some sort of marijuana growing operation happening on his property, and this was discovered at his house by police as they looked for Jessica Padgett. Detectives had seized 13 bags of marijuana, $42,000 in cash, and envelopes containing marijuana seeds that had been located in a safe in the basement. And additionally, evidence of a former marijuana growing operation in an exterior building on the property was also discovered. So I bet Greg Graff wishes he'd put that cash somewhere else, hid it, because he could have used that to pay for the lawyer, and now it's just sitting in a police evidence room, allegedly. So on December 9th, 2014, the district attorney, John Morganelli, announced that they had been trying to figure out when exactly the sexual abuse had happened. Had it happened only after Jessica's death or before as well as after? And Morganelli stated that because they had determined the sexual abuse had only happened afterwards, he would be unable to seek the death penalty against Graff. Because under Pennsylvania law, a murder in perpetration of a felony is an aggravated factor that allows for prosecutors to pursue capital charges, and rape does rise to that level. But apparently, necrophilia and desecration of a corpse does not, which seems crazy, right? Especially considering the motive for the murder was so that he could desecrate the corpse. This seems crazy. And in times like these, I feel like the law should have a little bit more wiggle room. But also, how often does something like this happen? Thankfully, not often. And we're going to come back to this whole death penalty thing and not being able to request it for Gregory Graff. So on December 19th, Gregory Graff hired a prominent defense attorney from Philadelphia to represent him. This guy's name, the defense attorney, is Jack McMahon, and we have to talk about him because he's a piece of work. Right out of law school, McMahon got a job with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office where he remained for 12 years. And the last 8 years he was with the DA's office, he was in the prestigious homicide unit where he prosecuted many high-profile murderers. Now, while he was an assistant district attorney there, Jack McMahon created a 1-hour training video, which was intended to instruct new prosecutors on how to select a jury for their cases. And I have to say, Jack McMahon has some very controversial and concerning takes.
When Taz called me up and asked me to speak on jury selection, I was thinking about it, and I said to myself, when you're talking about jury selection, that is probably the single most important part of a case. Preparation, evidence, witnesses, statements, doesn't mean anything unless you have a good jury. And I've seen more than one case, great cases, and you have a lousy jury. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference unless you have a good jury. So it is probably the single most important thing that you're going to learn to do to be a good jury lawyer is to be able to pick good juries. That means that you want, as I said earlier, stable, conservative people. That's what you want. Okay, what do you do to get those type of people? Number one, I told you, you look at their married life, their background, how long they've been married, how long they've been employed. Those same things I just went through, whether they've been schooled, how long they stayed in school, all these different factors to tell you that these are stable people. Now, I'm going to tell you things that I think over the years that have come to me of doing this. And again, it's all an individual. Anybody tells you anything about trying a case and says it in dogma is wrong, because things change and it's different for every individual. But I've had fairly good success with these rules, and I think if you stay to them, you'll have fairly good success too. And that is, let's face it again, there's the blacks from the low-income areas are less likely to convict. It's just, I understand it. It's an understandable proposition. There's a resentment for law enforcement. There's a resentment for authority. And as a result, you don't want those people on your jury. And it may appear as if you're being racist or whatnot, but again, you're just being realistic. You're just trying to win the case. And the other side's doing the same thing, so to just try to be noble and esoteric is not going to work.
Okay, so that's who we're dealing with here. McMahon's a shark. Even as a prosecutor, he wanted to win at any cost. And he's saying these things, and he doesn't seem to have a problem saying, and he said other things too. This was just one clip that I picked, but he said a lot of other things. And basically what I got from Jack McMahon, and I didn't just get it. I'm sorry, I didn't just garner it. I'm not like brilliant. I didn't read between his lines. I think he actually said this, where he was like, I don't really care like what the jury thinks or who they are, as long as I know that they will convict, as long as I know that they have a higher tendency to convict. Like, what kind of people have a higher probability of convicting a criminal? And this was his kind of MO in choosing a jury. And it really didn't matter if they were smart or if they felt that, they could look at information unbiasedly. He wanted people who wouldn't look at information in an unbiased way. He's instructing these people, and you can tell he's in front of an audience at this point, by the way. So they're filming this in front of an audience. It's like some kind of, I don't know, like third-rate TED Talk. You can hear people in the background murmuring. So he's on stage doing this. And then this video was also used as a training tool for new prosecutors to the DA's office. And it's just, we can see the kind of person that we're dealing with here. He cares about wins. And after leaving the district attorney's office, McMahon went into private practice, specializing in criminal defense. So he went from prosecuting criminals to defending them. And to be honest, he's defended some of the worst. And it's not surprising to me that someone like Gregory Graff would gravitate to an attorney like Jack McMahon and vice versa. Jack McMahon really, like I said, cared about winning. It didn't matter what side he was on. It didn't matter if he was for the criminals or against them. He cared about winning. And as a defense attorney, in my opinion, he cared about a paycheck. So on February 1st, 2015, Graff and his lawyer waived their right to a preliminary hearing on the charges. And why did this happen? Not because they have self-awareness, not because they're like, we'll just take it to trial. We don't need to see what you have against us. We don't need to, do all this song and dance. We can save the taxpayers' money. No, that wasn't why. This decision to waive the right to a preliminary hearing came after the defense viewed the video of Gregory Graff abusing the corpse of his stepdaughter. And this then led to Jack McMahon stating that he would be seeking a mental health evaluation of his client, even though he was unaware of any prior mental health issues that Gregory Graff had experienced. McMahon claimed that he believed his client had suffered an instantaneous mental health breakdown, stating, quote, "I don't think anyone saw this coming. I don't think the defendant saw this coming," end quote. I would agree. I don't think anyone saw this coming. The defendant definitely saw it coming. And we'll talk about that. So in response, the district attorney, John Morganelli, said, quote, "I don't think that he, based on my interactions and dealings with Graff, has any illness, mental health problems, or the diminished capacity that would prevent him from forming a specific intent to kill," end quote. And this is important because under Pennsylvania law, defendants have to prove that they had like a psychotic breakdown, that they saw or heard things that didn't exist, that they were not in control of their faculties, basically, that they don't remember what happened or, something just snapped inside of them. They have to prove that in order to be found not guilty by reason of mental insanity or defect. And John Morganelli stated that he intended to seek conviction of first-degree murder, which would bring with it an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. And in order to do that, Morganelli's going to have to prove premeditation. I think that we're all smart enough here to know that there was premeditation, right? Plenty of it. So Gregory Graff's trial was scheduled to begin in September with jury selection starting on September 8th, but this was not to be, as Jack McMahon was far too busy and far too important to be ready for trial so soon. In August of 2015, McMahon requested that Judge Stephen Barada delay the trial. He claimed that a doctor that had been retained to evaluate Gregory Graff had only conducted one interview with the defendant, and he needed more time to fully review and investigate the mental health component. Jack also said that his schedule was pretty packed. He was busy defending other murderers, and he actually had a death penalty case starting in Philly the following week. He was currently defending a murderer in trial. I think 2 different murderers he was in trial with them, so he's got a lot going on. And according to Jack McMahon, all of these cases had been in place and scheduled before he took Graff as a client, which I think kind of makes it even worse, if you ask my opinion, because you saw your schedule, you saw how busy you were, you saw how many clients you had, but you thought to yourself, in my opinion, Jack McMahon, what's one more gonna do? Let me take on this delusional man, Gregory Graff, who has money, but also has a delusional belief that he can possibly get away with this. Gregory Graff wants to go to trial. Who am I to tell him he can't and to take his money in the process? So Morganelli, the district attorney, he pushed back. He said, listen, we, the state, are ready. I've already interviewed and cleared 40 witnesses. They're lined up to testify at the trial. We are ready. This is when it's supposed to happen. And Morganelli also cited a statement that Jack McMahon has signed the previous May, in which the defense attorney had acknowledged that September was a firm date for the trial to begin, right? Jack McMahon had actually signed something that said, hey, we know we're going to trial at this time, and I'm open and ready to do that. But he wasn't. So in response, John Morganelli said, quote, "We went out of our way to accommodate Mr. McMahon. I like Mr. McMahon on a personal level, but he shouldn't be taking more cases and agreeing to trial dates if he isn't available," end quote. And tell me what John Morganelli said there that was rude or wrong. Nothing. I thought he was pretty chill about it. He's like, hey, I like this guy as a person. Got no problem with him personally, but professionally, I think it's probably a good idea if, you don't double book your clients and you don't make everybody wait because you're so busy and important, right? And he didn't even say it that way. He was super nice about it. But Jack McMahon came back with a very rude and dismissive response saying, quote, "He's interviewed 40 witnesses? Come on, man. We've all done this a million times. It's not like I'm going to be playing golf those days. I'm not ready with the case. I've been bombarded with cases," end quote. Okay, Jose Baez. So the date for jury selection was moved to November 2nd, But in October of 2015, the district attorney, John Morganelli, was even more frustrated. He said that he had yet to receive an expert report from the defense's psychologist, even though there'd been a court-ordered deadline of October 1st. And Morganelli explained that this had not left the prosecution enough time to decide on whether or not they wanted an expert of their own to examine Graff, and that this decision couldn't be made until the defense findings were known. And that's true. Like, you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know if you need your own expert. You don't know even what kind of arguments you're going to put against the defense if you can't see what they have and what they know. And Morganelli said, quote, "I've waited 3 weeks. Here we are. We can't be surprised on the eve of a trial," end quote. And remember, the court-ordered deadline for this evaluation was October 1st. We're 3 weeks into October at this point, with jury selection starting the first week of November, and Morganelli's absolutely right. There's not enough time to plan any sort of rebuttal to any expert witness that, Gregory Graff and his lawyer are going to bring on. Morganelli also felt that the missing report was just another tactic to delay the trial, and he not only wanted Jack McMahon hit with a fine, but he wanted the judge to prevent Gregory Graff from presenting expert testimony during his trial. And honestly, here's what I think happened. Because the prosecution would call witnesses for the trial, the defense did not call any witnesses. And I think that Jack McMahon did get the report back from the psychologist that examined Gregory Graff, and the report was basically like, yeah, this guy's not mentally ill. He's just like sick. There's a difference. Like, he was never in a place where he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. He's not mentally ill. He didn't have a mental break. And that's it. That's basically it. Even the expert that the defense paid for was unable to kind of, blur the lines enough to make this testimony and this expert analysis beneficial for Gregory Graff. And the point of the matter is why he couldn't do that is because what's going on with Gregory Graff is not a mental illness of sorts. And the reason I believe that this expert psychologist couldn't make this work for Graff is because really what was happening with Gregory Graff was not a mental illness or like a psychosis. It was a paraphilic disorder. So what's a paraphilic disorder? Paraphilic disorders are recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, urges, or behaviors that are distressing or disabling and that involve inanimate objects, children, or non-consenting adults, or suffering or humiliation of the person or a partner with the potential to cause harm. So paraphilias involve sexual arousal to atypical objects, situations, and or targets, such as children, corpses, animals. And it says the unconventional sexual arousal patterns in paraphilias are considered pathological disorders only when both of the following apply. They are intense and persistent, and they cause significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, or they harm or have the potential to harm others, right? So I want to come back to this because, once again, Gregory Graff was not in some, clutches of psychosis. He had a paraphilic disorder. And this is going to become important when we hear from Gregory during his police interview as he describes what he was thinking and what was going on in the moments before and during the murder of Jessica Padgett. On November 2nd, 2015, 70 potential jurors were questioned by both the defense and prosecution. And District Attorney John Morganelli asked them if they believed they would be able to handle watching a 6 to 7 minute video that might be played at trial. And this would be the video that Gregory Graff made after killing his stepdaughter. Now, 15 people outright said no. And that would have been me. No, I can't watch this. I'm not going to watch this. And one man actually stated, I will not watch it. And when Morganelli attempted to clarify, asking the man if he meant he would be unable to watch it, the man replied, quote, I won't watch it, end quote. Same boat. I won't watch that. That's just going through this case. I feel like I'll never be the same. Watching that video, no, that's nightmare fuel. It would be replaying in my brain every time I closed my eyes for the rest of my life. Absolutely not. But I guess there were enough jurors who felt that they would be able to handle it, and on November 10th, opening statements began with John Morganelli outlining the evidence that the authorities had collected against Gregory Graff. Morganelli went through each item, showing the jury how the crime had been premeditated and planned. He said that Graff had planned the murder knowing his wife would be out of town, and not only had he gone shopping for sex toys the day before the murder, even though his wife Danielle said they never used sex toys during sex before, Graff also purchased a bunch of cleaning supplies from Miller Supply Ace Hardware the day before, including a mop. And the manager of the store knew Graff because he would come in often for supplies, but when asked if the items Graff had purchased on November 20th, were they consistent with things he usually bought, the manager said that they were not. Morganelli also explained how after the murder, Graff had abandoned Jessica's vehicle in a parking lot and that he had prearranged to have his truck parked close by so that he could get away from the scene. He had driven his truck into town earlier that day and left it there. Now, what wasn't answered is how the hell did he get home? And I don't have access to this whole trial. I think there was obviously like reporters in the courtroom. I know there were, but I don't think they had cameras in there, and we just don't have all the details from the trial. But how did he get home? Did he have somebody pick him up and drive him home? Because he couldn't have walked. I mean, he could have, but that would have been quite a hike. It would have taken quite a long time. So if he had driven the truck into town earlier, like very much earlier, like 8 a.m. and left it there and then walked, I suppose he could have done it. But did somebody drive him home? I'd be very curious to know that. So obviously there's premeditation here, right? In every sense of the word. And John Morganelli told a stunned jury that Graff had killed to fulfill his sexual fantasy, and he had filmed the crime for his viewing pleasure at a later date. Now, it was the DA's job to show the jury that not only did Graff take time before the murder to put things in place so that he would be able to attempt to get away with it afterwards, but he had known what he had done was wrong and that he had tried to cover his steps to avoid getting caught, which is also, once again, a sign that you're not having a mental break and you're not dancing with psychosis. You know what you're doing. You're cognizant that you did something wrong because you're trying to cover it up. You're trying to make sure that you don't get caught. That is a sign that somebody is not, committing a crime because of a mental illness or like a break from reality. So then the defense lawyer, Jack McMahon, he got up in front of the jury and, he's a showman. So he said, I'm about to do something that I've rarely done in all my decades of representing criminal clients. He said, listen, my client, Gregory Graff, is in fact guilty of killing Jessica Padgett. And he is in fact guilty of videotaping himself performing sexual acts with her corpse. But Graff should not be convicted of first-degree murder because he just snapped. And I'm not sure how Jack McMahon was able to say this with a straight face after the prosecution had just illustrated all the ways this crime had been planned and premeditated, right? Like, you're not really answering those things. How did his truck get there? Why did he buy the toys and the cleaning supplies the day before? You're really kind of skirting over that. How did he say it with a straight face? I don't know. But he said some other shit with a straight face as well. McMahon stated with his chest that his client knew what he had done was wrong and he deserved to be punished for it. But, quote, something snapped in this good man's mind on that date. Something happened that wasn't planned, end quote. But it was planned, my dude. Okay, we just went over that. And the fact that Jack McMahon felt the need to label Gregory Graff as a good man while Jessica's family and loved ones sat in that courtroom, it makes me physically ill. It makes me hate this person with a burning passion. What Jack McMahon was trying to do is pretty clear. There was obviously an overwhelming amount of evidence against Gregory Graff. There was literally a video showing what he did to Jessica after he shot her in the back of the head. And so there was no way that McMahon was going to convince the jury that his client was not guilty. What he was trying to do was to give them the slightest sliver of doubt that the murder had been planned, because third-degree murder does not require premeditation and only has a sentence of 20 to 40 years. But ultimately, I don't even think Jack McMahon really, put his all into this, because I think he kind of knew, this guy's not getting away with this, and my check's getting cashed either way, It's just my opinion. Don't come for me, but Jack McMahon did not give a shit. So Jessica's mother, Danelle, who's now going by the last name Bittner, she also testified. And she said that when her husband was arrested, the last words he said to her were, "I love you." And he had called her from jail 3 times. And Danelle said she never asked him for an explanation. She never asked him why he had done it because she knew he was going to lie to her anyways. She was also asked by Jack McMahon if there was anything in her husband's relationship with her daughter that had been concerning or raised red flags. And Jack McMahon is asking her this because he wants to show the jury, like, there were no red flags. There were no signs. There were no issues between Jessica and Gregory. They got along. He acted as her father. So this must mean that he snapped, right? But in my opinion, no, that's bullshit. In my opinion, what happened is Gregory Graff, had these feelings for a long time. And that's another reason why I will never believe the "he just snapped" excuse, among many others. Graff had thought about this for some time, but McMahon's trying to have Danelle say, like, no, it was a complete and utter surprise, which is what she did say, right? She did say that. She said it was a complete and utter surprise. But, like, damn. What are we thinking here? That Gregory Graff is having all of these feelings towards Jessica and he's going to talk about it? He's going to tell people? No. Here's my quick opinion. I think that Gregory Graff always had a thing for Jessica. He always wanted her, but he knew that he couldn't initiate anything with her or even take her by force because she would have told people and turned him in. And Jessica was incredibly loyal to her husband and her family. She never would have willingly embarked in a consensual relationship with Gregory Graff. And I honestly don't think he wanted a consensual partner anyways. But I do believe that Gregory Graff was always jealous of anyone who was with Jessica, like as far as, in a romantic relationship. And he made this known in subtle ways because most of what was going on in his head when it came to Jessica was kept very under wraps since he knew how wrong it was. He'd known her since she was 11. Scrolling through Jessica's Facebook, we can see that Greg commented on her posts a lot. In March of 2013, Jessica mentioned that she was sick and she had to work that night. And Greg replied, quote, "We will send you flowers, ... end quote. A few days before that, Jessica posted that her son was running a fever. Her other son had a cough and her throat was killing her, to which Greg replied, quote, "Suck it up and get to work, ... end quote. On March 18th, Jessica wrote about how the Department of Vital Records had gotten all of her children's birth certificates wrong. And Greg's reply to this was, quote, "Your clue to stop having kids, ... end quote. Before Jessica began working at the daycare center, she wrote about dropping her youngest off at daycare for the first time and how hard this was for her. She said, she thought it would be easy because she'd already done it with 2 other kids, but she was wrong. It was very hard. She felt like she was going to throw up. And once again, Greg pipes in with an unhelpful comment, quote, "Get to work and stop crying, ... end quote. In a post from February of 2013, Jessica did this thing where it's like, age given. So she was given the age 23 and she talked about where she lived when she was 23, what she drove when she was 23, what she did for work, who had her heart when she was 23. And then she does this again for her age at the time of the post, which was 32. She wrote where she lived, what she drove, what her job was, and who had her heart, Micah, to which Greg replied, quote, "Sad. LOL, end quote." No dots this time. No dots this time because Greg had said exactly what he intended to say. And when a person writes something and then puts 3 dots after it, as Greg usually did in his Facebook replies to Jessica, it's called an ellipsis, and it implies that the person is trailing off in thought or leaving something unsaid. It hints at something more without saying it directly, which leaves room for interpretation, tension, or subtext. So whenever Jessica would write anything about her happy life or her strong relationships, Greg's got nothing to say. He's crickets. He doesn't even like the post. If she was talking about how great Micah was, Greg certainly had nothing to say. But when she was writing about being sick or feeling emotional and being away from her kids, when she's being vulnerable, Greg sure had some passive-aggressive, smart-ass, smooth-brain shit to say. And I think it's because he hated her. I think it's because he hated her. I cannot put my finger on it, but it feels like something someone does when they actually resent you. They don't really like you, but they want to remain in your orbit so they can neg you, make you feel bad about yourself, make you question yourself, just give you a general negative experience in life. And I have to feel like most people have experience with someone like this, and once again, I can't put my finger on why it feels so violating and so just like annoying and so just like nagging, but it's just immature, pointless, toxic discourse that I have seen others do. And I don't affiliate myself with people like that who never really have anything positive to say and don't seem to be interested in certain aspects of your life while they seem to be obsessed with others. It felt like Greg would comment when she was down, when she was vulnerable, and he would make these little like passive aggressive, like underhanded jabs to just make her feel worse. I can't, I really wish I could explain myself better. I really wish I could, but hopefully you guys are picking up on what I'm putting down, you're understanding, and please let me know in the comments if you felt this or you understand what I'm trying to say here and you can verbalize it better. So during the trial, a coworker of Jessica's, Shanann Tumini, also testified. And she said that before Jessica left work on November 21st, 2014, she was getting calls from her stepfather who said he needed her to help him with a computer program. And Tumini said, quote, her phone was ringing nonstop. She was going to go after work, but he kept calling her and stressing her out, end quote. And I really think that Gregory Graff did not want Jessica to come after work because he knew if she came after work, she would have her 2-year-old son with her. It's just more mess for him to clean up, right? He can't say that Jessica was never at his house if her 2-year-old son is at his house. So he wanted her to come on his lunch break when he knew that her son would still be in daycare. Another friend of Jessica's, Kaylee Hillegrass, testified about seeing Gregory Graff at his house on the evening of November 21st. And at one point, Gregory had excused himself from the conversation. He claimed his hands were cracking from the cold because he'd been outside looking for Jessica with the search parties. And Kaylee said he grabbed a tissue or a paper towel and wiped his hands and foot before throwing the paper away. But she saw blood left behind on the paper before it was thrown away. Heather Fuchs also testified that Gregory Graff had intentionally misled search parties, which he took part in. And Heather is Gregory Graff's own daughter. She said that while everyone was searching, he pointed to his backyard and he was like, oh, we've already had searchers here. They already checked this area. I checked this area. And now, obviously, when she's testifying, she knows he was purposely trying to keep people away from that area because he knew that that's where Jessica's body was. Now, audio of Gregory Graff's police interview was played for the jury. And during this time, as well as others throughout the trial, Jessica's parents had to periodically leave the courtroom because it was just too much to hear. But Jessica's husband, Micah, he stayed. He remained in his seat the entire time. And he only put his head down into his hands and cradled his head during especially tough moments. And I think that he did this because he was like, I'm going to stick this out for Jessica. I'm going to stay here so she has representation in this courtroom. I will not leave. I will not abandon her. You can tell, you hear him talk. He loved her very much. The loss of his wife was incredibly traumatic, impactful, the saddest, most, horrible thing that will ever happen to him. But Gregory Graff is talking to the police in this audio, and during his confession, he spoke matter-of-factly, with his voice occasionally breaking with emotion, according to the Morning Call, who had reporters present in the courtroom for the trial. Graff called what had happened that day hell and a nightmare. Like, for real, dude? For who? For you? No, not for you, okay? For Jessica, yeah, hell and a nightmare. For you? Stop. He said he knew what he had done was wrong, but he still tried to cover it up. Graff said, quote, I wasn't thinking. I thought I could get away with something. At that point, my mind was basically still spinning, basically thinking about sex for whatever reason. During that time, I tried to video. I don't know why. I'm not really a bad guy, and I just lost my mind temporarily. I don't want to hurt anyone, end quote. Graff said that he could not fathom his actions, and he didn't know what in his past life had led him to commit them. He said he did remember a peeping Tom incident that had happened when he was a boy in Bucks County, but he denied ever fantasizing about violence, even though he admitted that he consumed a lot of pornography, and he'd been watching some before Jessica arrived to his house that day. Do I believe he consumed a lot of pornography? Yes. Do I believe that he feels like he has no idea what happened and just in that moment he kind of went crazy and he doesn't, understand his own actions? No, I don't. And here's why. Because of the fact that he had this paraphilic disorder. And remember, we talked about the definition of what a paraphilic disorder is. And part of that was that they cause significant distress or impairment to the person who's experiencing it, right? And, so sad for Gregory Graff. But what else was part of that definition? They are intense and persistent. There is absolutely no goddamn way that Gregory Graff is going to convince me or anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together to make a spark that this was the first time he'd ever fantasized about having, sexual relations with a corpse. No. Persistent and intense. It is very likely that this had been going on for quite a while. And of course, he's not going to talk to anybody about it. He's not going to tell people like, hey, it's kind of weird. My sexual fantasies lately have been slanting to the extreme. He's going to keep that very private. What I'm saying is, he could have gotten help. He could have been like, this is messed up. I should not be fantasizing about this. I should not be thinking about this. This is very abnormal. It goes beyond a fetish. This is very abnormal and weird, and it scares me. I need to seek help and get help for this. But he didn't. And there's no damn way he just snapped in the moment and had never thought about or considered having sex with a corpse before, and then all of a sudden, that's all he wants to do. I will not believe it. Intense and persistent. He was also asked why he went to the closet and got the gun. And Graff said, just a crazy thought had come into his head. That's his only reasoning that he gave. A crazy thought came into my head. Graff had also told detectives that he hadn't said anything to his stepdaughter before he shot her in the head. And when he was asked if he knew he was going to shoot her, Graff said, quote, "No, absolutely not," end quote. Do we believe that he didn't know he was going to shoot her? No, absolutely not. Like I've said a million times, he premeditated this. What did you premeditate to get her over there alone for if you didn't know what you were going to do? You bought the toys and the cleaning supplies the day before. And then you went and left your truck at the place where you knew you were going to leave her vehicle later. Like, what are you talking about? You didn't know you were going to do it. That's absolutely insane. And that's not all, because in the weirdest twist, Gregory Graff, during his police interview, during his confession, also lamented not choosing his neighbor, 46-year-old Karen Gundrum, as his victim instead of Jessica. Because, quote, "I would have gotten away with it. No one would have known," end quote. And to me, this entire statement completely eliminates any possibility that this was not premeditated and he just snapped in the moment. Graff claiming that he was just standing there and a crazy thought came into his head, and then he went and got the gun, and that's why he shot Jessica and did what he did to her. But then to also say that he regrets not choosing Karen as his victim, which tells me that this was a choice. This was a thing that he actively thought about and a choice he knowingly made. In fact, I would bet good money that Gregory Graff had been planning this, and maybe it wasn't Jessica, maybe it was just anybody, and this was just convenient for him, but I would wager to say that he had been planning this and thinking persistently and intensely about this for weeks, if not months, if not years. I would guarantee you. And he just had never summoned, the actual courage to do it, or the timing had never been right. But for him to say like, "Oh, I regret not choosing Karen Gundrum as my victim because nobody would have known." Karen Gundrum's got to be like, dude, what the fuck? Like, what? I've been your neighbor and your friend for like years. And then you're trying to use me as an alibi, and now you regret not choosing me as your victim? Oh, my goodness. This dude. So on the last day of the trial, which was Friday, November 14th, 2015, the jury of 9 men and 3 women viewed the video that Gregory Graff had made after killing his stepdaughter. The morning call described the reaction of the jurors as they viewed the unthinkable. Quote, "One juror's eyes filled with tears as the video played. Another's face twisted into a look of profound distaste. Another sat motionless with his hand over his mouth, his fingers pinching his eyes. The courtroom was silent," end quote. Reportedly, the video was made up of 8 recordings that were shot by Graff over the span of 2 hours using not 1, but 2 cameras. He had to actively set up 2 cameras, but he had no idea what he was doing. He just snapped in the moment. And the morning call reported that even the sounds from the recordings were taxing to hear, with Graff at one point speaking profanely to Padgett's lifeless body. And neither Gregory Graff nor his attorney were able to watch the video during the trial. McMahon kept his eyes averted and swiveled his chair away, and Graff pretended to be engrossed in court documents. He was probably afraid that if he looked up, his body would give himself away and tell everyone, including the jury, that he was genuinely enjoying his work. So when the videos were done playing, the jury sat silently with vacant expressions for several minutes. And then the jury deliberated for only 6 minutes before coming back with a decision of first-degree murder, sentencing Gregory Graff to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They also found him guilty of abusing Jessica's corpse, which added a 1 to 2 year term on top of the life sentence, purely symbolic at this point. But believe it or not, that's the maximum sentence someone can get for this charge. 1 to 2 years for desecrating a corpse, for doing what he did to Jessica's body. 1 to 2, that's the maximum sentence. I don't understand the justice system sometimes. Now, when Judge Stephen Barada read Graff's sentence to him, he then said, quote, "This is a crime against human nature. What you did violates basic family bonds. Jessica's relatives will have to suffer from this crime for the rest of their lives, and my heart goes out to them," end quote. After the verdict came back, Jack McMahon claimed he wasn't surprised by the jury's decision or by the quickness with which they had reached it. He said that his client had wanted to go to trial because he was adamant that he had not planned this act, and he wanted everyone to know that. McMahon said, quote, "He had his trial, he had a fair trial, and the jury spoke. I understand the verdict, and I don't really quarrel with it at all. It's just an unfortunate, sad day for a lot of people," end quote. But not for you, McMahon, not for you, because you got paid. And what do you care? You don't care about these people. You don't care about these people. I'm sorry. I don't like him. Of course he's okay with it. Of course he doesn't have a quarrel with it. The only reason McMahon took that case was to get a paycheck from a delusional man who actually thought he could convince anyone that he wasn't an irredeemable piece of shit, allegedly, in my opinion. Don't come for me. Don't come for me, Jack McMahon, okay? Now with your track record. Now, about Graff insisting on a trial, Jessica's sister Christy got up and told him off. She said he was the most selfish person in the world because he could have just taken the punishment he knew was coming instead of making Jessica's loved ones have to sit through the most traumatic thing they would ever experience, a trial in which all the details were laid bare. And a week after the trial ended, a bench was dedicated to Jessica Padgett in Riverwalk Park, where she had spent many an afternoon playing happily with her children. Her mother, Danielle Bittner, said, quote, "Jess brought her kids here. They played here. They walked these trails. This was their special spot where they came to have fun together in their neighborhood," end quote. In 2017, Jessica's husband, Michael, filed a civil lawsuit against Graff on behalf of himself and the children he and Jessica shared. The suit claimed that Graff's crimes had inflicted severe emotional distress on Micah and his children and accused Graff of, quote, "extreme and outrageous conduct which goes beyond all possible bounds of decency and which is atrocious and utterly intolerable in a civilized community," end quote. Micah was seeking funeral expenses, compensation for Jessica's lost wages, and retirement benefits, as well as punitive damages. And then a few months later, Graff appeared via video feed from his prison cell, contesting the terms of the divorce from his wife, Danelle. So here's where I said we would come back to it. Remember? Graff's like hiring an attorney, and he's like, "I need a public defender because I don't want to steal these funds from my family who could use them." Well, apparently, Graff had agreed to the terms of the divorce the previous February, and it stated that he would get 25% of the shared assets, which is ludicrous to me because what the hell does he need that for? He is in prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of parole. But he was worried about taking money from his family, and now he's not. All right. And so Gregory Graff was claiming that he wasn't okay with these terms anymore and that his lawyer, Jack McMahon, had not given him the proper information before agreeing to the terms. I mean, you owe this woman everything at this point. You killed her child and you're squabbling over some money that you can't even use because you're in prison for life. It really shows you what kind of person we're dealing with. This man, when the judge asked him after his trial, "Do you have anything to say?" And he was like, "All I can say is I'm sorry and I wish this hadn't happened." He wasn't sorry. He doesn't seem sorry at all. He's sorry that he got caught. He's sorry that he has to do the time for his crime. He's sorry that he's not going to be able to use his money. But what is the point? What is the point in taking it from your wife? It doesn't make any sense. You can't use it, and you don't deserve it, honestly. You don't deserve it. you owe Danelle everything. No amount of money would ever compensate what you stole from her, you piece of shit. And then a month after this, Gregory Graff filed an appeal seeking a new trial, claiming his lawyer had been ineffective. And in this filing, Graff all of a sudden gave a completely different version for what had happened on November 21st, 2014. Now he claimed that Jessica came over and he was high on mushrooms and marijuana and also drunk, and then he and Jessica got into an argument. And he doesn't have McMahon anymore to help him with this stuff because he basically said McMahon sucked during his first trial. He's trying to get a new trial based on the fact that Jack McMahon didn't do his job in the first trial. So obviously Jack McMahon is not going to, help him with this appeal. But so Gregory Graff wrote it himself, and he said, quote, "When asked to leave, the victim started a fight with defendant. Defendant blacked out in a fit of anger brought on by the argument and the stress and the reaction to the drugs and alcohol. Defendant shot and killed victim, and once sober attempted to cover up what had happened," end quote. I think you're leaving something out there, Greg. What part of that day did you leave out that cannot be explained away by, some mushrooms and marijuana? What part are we leaving out? And the district attorney, John Morganelli, had the same kind of thought that I did. He responded to this saying that he had no memory of any prior claims that Graff had been on drugs that day, because there were no prior claims. This was a completely new claim. And in his little note, his little appeal, Graff makes no mention of what he did after the murder. And Morganelli said, quote, "He skips the sexual part. How does he justify that? They are frivolous claims. I have a feeling it may be related to his divorce because he's unhappy about the freezing of his assets," end quote. Yeah, his assets got frozen. So, the assets you don't need, you're in prison forever, okay? Which hopefully for you isn't long. So yeah. This is one of the more mind-boggling, soul-draining cases that we've covered in a while. It truly does boggle the mind. It really, I cannot, it's like when my brain tries to understand it, it just keeps hitting a wall. What came over Gregory Graff? What would compel him to do such a horrible thing to a young woman he had known since she was a child, someone he helped raise, and who he had acted as a father figure towards? According to many psychological studies, the most common motive for necrophilia is possession of an unresisting and unrejecting partner. And this type of behavior is mostly committed by males. In one study of 123 cases, 92% of the perpetrators were men. And, you get your average necrophiliac, people who place themselves in occupations where they will have easier access to corpses like hospitals or morgues. But Gregory Graff's crime falls under the category of necrophilic homicide. The victims are killed specifically so that the perpetrators can satisfy their violent urges. Necrophilia is honestly not a well-understood concept, which, why would it be? It makes total sense that it's not well understood because the majority of us, once again, cannot wrap our heads around it. We cannot understand. What you have is these men ignoring their natural human aversion to a corpse in order to fulfill some weird, morbid, just abnormal sexual fantasy. And, I don't understand it. And, there's going to be people, I don't think in this comment section, but there are people out there that try to normalize necrophilia. And they say, it's not, it's not as bad as we think. And it's not weird. And the person's not alive. So it doesn't affect them at all. They're just an object. Yeah, that's the problem. As I said earlier, a corpse cannot reject, criticize, or abandon the perpetrator. And this makes them the perfect partner for someone who has low self-esteem and low self-worth, who has fears of abandonment and rejection, and who craves total control in any given situation with another person. For violent serial killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, necrophilia is tied to domination and control. A corpse becomes an object over which the person has complete power and may fulfill all of their most sadistic fantasies. That is not normal and should not be normalized. Edmund Kemper was disturbingly open about his necrophilic acts, and during interviews with psychiatrists and law enforcement, he admitted that he decapitated his victims and engaged in sexual acts with their heads and bodies. He described having sex with corpses after killing them, stating that the sexual attraction was not to the act of killing itself, but rather to the corpse once that person was his. So he's saying, I'm not, I don't get off on killing. And some killers do, right? There are killers out there, serial killers, and some people who just actually enjoy the act of killing. And Kemper was saying, like, no, I don't enjoy the act of killing. That's not where I get off. It's the fact that I made this person an object, that I made this person an object with no autonomy, who cannot say no to me, and who is mine to do what I want with. Kemper once told psychiatrist Dr. Joel Fort, quote, "If I killed them, they couldn't reject me as a man," end quote. Well, you're not a man, so. But that statement alone, right, points to a deep psychological motive. Fear of rejection, a desire for complete control over another person, one that could only be satisfied by turning them into an object. Kemper's murders were not impulsive, they were methodical and ritualized. Mental health professionals believe he was fulfilling an obsessive need to possess and control his victims completely, both in life and in death. The killing was just a means to an end. Necrophilia, in Kemper's case, was an extension of omnipotent control. The victim was no longer a person, but a silent, compliant object. And in many interviews, he would emphasize dominance over the body and the act of reducing a human being to an object of his desire. And this actually does align with how psychopathy and certain paraphilic disorders manifest through the objectification and dehumanization of others. And I said I was going to bring this back to hunting, to Gregory Graff's obsession with hunting, the clear and immense joy it brought him. And I am a woman of my word, because it seems that Graff kind of had this, right? And he didn't just have a desire to objectify or dehumanize people. He'd been doing this with animals for a while. Although there does not seem to be a direct statistic indicating how many violent criminals have a history of hunting, some studies have explored potential associations between hunting and violent behaviors. For instance, a study published by Faunalytics examined the relationship between hunting and illegal violence among college males. And the study found that hunters were about twice as likely to have been violent towards non-human animals compared to non-hunters. Specifically, nearly half, 48.4%, of those who had killed an animal while hunting reported committing at least one act of animal abuse outside of hunting. Now, why are they saying a non-human creature, right? Why are they specifically referring to non-human? Well, that's because we are talking about reporting in a psychological study, and most people might not, if they have anonymity, they might not have a problem with, disclosing the fact that, they've committed animal abuse. But they probably wouldn't be so quick to be like, yeah, I've done this to people too, right? So you have an issue with reporting. Nobody's going to be honest and say that they've also taken their violent aggressions out on humans as well as animals. But in general, in my opinion, if you can abuse a living creature such as an animal, an innocent animal, you can do it to a human. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. And of course, it's important to note that this study focused on a specific demographic and does not establish a causal link between hunting and violent criminal behavior. And I do believe that the majority of hunters do not engage in violent crimes, disclaimer, et cetera, et cetera. But listen, there may be a link, right? Because let's be honest with ourselves, please. Psychologically speaking, repeated exposure to killing, whether animal or human, can lead to desensitization. Someone had asked Greg on Facebook, when do you have all this time to go to Florida and hunt? And his reply was, quote, "I work my ass off from April to September, and then it's time to kill," end quote. And this is weird. This is weird, man, because why couldn't you just say that you work hard and then you deserve some time off? Or then you get to go and enjoy the fruits of your labor? Why does it feel like he's making it seem as if he works so hard so that he can have some uninterrupted kill time to go out and massacre some innocent animals frolicking through the woods? Why phrase it like that, dude? Why? I work this hard so I can go out and kill. What? I can't. I understand hunting for survival. Okay? I do. I don't really understand hunting for sport. I will never be able to wrap my head around finding the experience of taking life, especially the life of an innocent animal who's just minding its own business, to be enjoyable. I don't get it. I don't. And it's not just the act of hunting with Gregory Graff or how often he did it. It's how much he bragged and boasted about it. It's the way he seemed to revel in his thirst for blood, the way he was proud of his kills. Kills made not to feed himself or his family, right? Not out of survival or necessity. he killed these animals so he could display their corpses as trophies and post them on Facebook. He glorified the act of killing, and I honestly have no doubt that the amount of hunting Gregory Graff took part in, the number of times he shot a living creature in the head, stopped a beating heart, and didn't think twice about it, I have no doubt that it added a layer of desensitization to the act of killing his stepdaughter, Jessica Padgett. I really, that's how I feel. And I don't want to offend anybody. And I know there's people who hunt and you're not going to be happy with what I said, but listen, live and let live. That's a bad example because hunters do not necessarily live and let live. Okay. To each their own, right? I'm sure I have hobbies and there's things that I like to do that hunters would be like, what is she like this for? Like, she's going to a Taylor Swift concert? She sucks. I don't understand this at all. I can't wrap my head around it. We all have our thing. Hunting is not mine. And on that note, I want to end with a thread of hope, a possibility that what happened to Jessica can change things for the better for others. I think we can all agree that if anyone deserves the death penalty, it's Gregory Graff. I hope we can all agree. Like, I don't know. I'm talking to you guys, but I'm not actually talking to you. And I feel very strongly that this person should, eye for an eye kind of thing. I hate him. I think he's a terrible, terrible, evil demon from the bowels of hell. So I hope we can all agree that if anyone deserves the death penalty, it's Gregory Graff. But because of Pennsylvania law not considering necrophilia as an aggravating circumstance, he gets to live out the rest of his life in prison, able to remember and re-remember in his mind what he did to Jessica over and over again. So Jessica's law has been sponsored by many state representatives and aims to include the desecration or mutilation of a corpse as an aggravating circumstance that may qualify a defendant for the death penalty in Pennsylvania. And this bill is currently under consideration and will hopefully pass when it is up for committee vote. But listen, if you live in Pennsylvania, I don't see why there would be any harm in writing to your state and local representatives, urging them to support this law, urging them to push it forward, urging them to, push a time for a vote, like schedule a time for a vote and get this into law. I think that would be absolutely fine if you did that. Do it for Jessica. Do it for, people like Jessica who might encounter people like Gregory Graff. And thankfully, I do think that people like Gregory Graff are very rare. I don't think there's a ton of people out there walking around killing people just so they can do things to their body afterwards. I find that to be, not that they don't think about it. I think that there might be more people than we know thinking about it. Once again, this is not something that you're going to find a lot of self-reporting when it comes to psychological studies. Very few people are going to be willing to come forward and admit having these thoughts or performing these behaviors. But I hope that people like Gregory Graff are rare. I really do. And I am very much looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are in the comment section. I've asked some questions today. I've said some things that some might think are inflammatory. I've said some things that you might want to address. Keep it respectful, keep it responsible. And I'm very much looking forward to having a conversation with you about this because there's a lot here that we need to talk about. And I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are in the comment section. So before we go, don't forget to like the video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. And I'll see you very, very soon. Bye.
Would a levee don't break now? And the bottle's going straight down.